interview. Michelle and Hester and Jabu, we're looking forward to your presentations here this afternoon, and we're going to start with Jabu's presentation first. Over to Jabu.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. I am going to take you through our presentation as DBE. I must point out that the presentation touches on high-level issues. I will be dealing with some of the issues that would get to the level of the school, but very briefly so. Rochelle, can you? Yeah, that's the presentation, and the presentation has been titled Navigating the Maze, and my sense is that it's like we are navigating the maze to find our way in terms of how we ensure that there is support for all the learners, including learners with disabilities. So that's how I've titled it, and it's navigating the maze for all of us. Next slide, please. That is the outline of the presentation. I'll be touching on some of the, I'll be sitting for a while in some of the slides, but in some of the slides I'll just pass because those are the slides that you'll already pick up easily. Next slide, please. That is the purpose of the presentation, is to, I'm going to be providing some report on the support that we've put in place for learners with disabilities in the context of COVID. Next slide, please. So that slide is just a reminder of our constitutional obligation in terms of Section 29, that at the core of this duty, we have a duty to ensure an uninhibited enjoyment of the right to a basic education, and this duty implies that we must ensure that all learners, teachers, and support staff are supported to give expression to these constitutional obligations, but also at the same time to balance it with their safety. Next slide, please. That is my understanding is that the outbreak of COVID-19 has taken us out, have driven us out of our spaces of safety, out of our comfort zones, and it has placed us into a new world. And for me, this world is full of opportunities and challenges at the same time. And we have seen that the difficult times presented by COVID-19 has put us in a place in which most of us have been calling for answers and calling for the past to be, and calling for the normal. In other words, people have been saying the situation will become normal, but then the situation is that the answers and the responses that we had obsolete. In other words, we need to find new ways of thinking and new ways of responding. And the reality is that this crisis will not be healed through the solutions that we've always had, but we'll have to embrace the new normal and come up with new solutions to the problems that are facing us. But also, having said that, my view is that there are also opportunities that are created by this time, as you will see when I go through the presentation. Next slide, please. What we have done at National is that we have been busy. We have been engaged with consultation with key stakeholders. I don't think that there is any other time where we've had so many times sitting in meetings with our stakeholders, and this has been one of those times where we've sat in one room for a countless number of times, and what is striking is that we've been navigating this maze together, holding hands, and in some cases with excitement, and in some cases with ugly faces at each other. but I think it's been a very challenging but also at the same time very fulfilling time. The third bullet there shows you some of the stakeholders that we have been meeting with, and I can't count the number of times in which we've met. And those are some of the key stakeholders that we have met in trying to shape, in trying to give shape to what our future is going to look like. Next slide, please. That slide provides you with some of the support that we've provided to special schools. One of them, the first bullet, speaks to the fact that what we have done, if you look at all our documents in the website, you will see that we've tried as much as we possibly can to include all the learners. In other words, we have been saying, when you read any document that we have released, it must have been written for all the learners. So we've tried and do that. But in cases where there are specific cases where we think that the learners, some categories of learners are not covered sufficiently, we have developed specific guidelines for those categories of learners. For instance, we've developed guidelines for blind and for blind learners and those with low vision, that is in schools for the blind. But we've also developed guidelines for deaf and hard of hearing learners as well, and guidelines for schools with autistic learners. I think coupled with that, we have in draft form the guidelines for therapists. That is still undergoing our internal processes. I am expecting that the other three guidelines will be in our website, I think latest tomorrow. But yeah, they are there. I think what has been delaying them is that we have had to consult widely to ensure that everybody's expectations in terms of those documents are met. But we've also provided input into the directions, into what they call the directions, what we call the regulations, to ensure that the needs and issues relating to learners with disabilities are adequately covered. This document was released on the 23rd of June, and it's now out in public. It's a document that you could also engage with it. I've already talked to the consultation meetings, so that one I'm not gonna hash again. And in terms of the guidelines and the directions, these are some of the issues that we focused on. All schools with learners with special educational needs must comply with all directions and circulars. So we've got a list of directions and circulars that we have developed, and all schools must comply with this when they reopen. And they must also, in addition to that, comply with the guidelines that you have developed. I've mentioned 3 sets of those guidelines, and all schools must comply with this. And we've also had, another area that we've identified is the area where practicing of social distancing may be difficult or is not always practical. And for those officials, we have included in the directions the fact that they must be provided with appropriate personal protective equipment to ensure that their lives and those of their learners are safe. Next slide, please. And in terms of the officials appointed to conduct a screening for, particularly in the schools for the deaf, one of the requirements is that they must be able to communicate using the South African Sign Language. And where this is not possible, then a sign language interpreter must be made available to ensure that the learners are able to follow what is being said and done. And that all communication with learners in respect of COVID-19 must be through media that are accessible to all learners. In other words, the information must be accessible to all the learners in various forms that may be required in specific instances. And we've also provided guidance in terms of the wearing of masks, because the mask has become one of the issues. I'm not going to speak deep into that because Michelle is going to be speaking to it. But we've provided guidelines in terms of what kinds of choices must be there for the schools for the deaf, for the schools for the blind, for the schools that cater for learners who are autistic. So we've given guidelines in terms of that, because the mask has become, as I have said, one of the major issues. And also the appropriate mechanisms that must be established for learners with commodities, learners from hotspot areas, learners whose parents have concerns about them returning to school within the context of COVID-19, and learners whose parents have opted to home educate. So we've given guidelines around those, because our sense is that not all our learners may be able to come to schools, to return to schools when the schools reopen. But then there is also another area where we work in, and it is in the special care centers. The special care centers are a responsibility of DSD. What we do as basic education is that we provide education in terms of the Constitution. So we've got officials that are appointed to work with the special care centers. But within the special care centers, we've got special care center managers and and caregivers. And like all the officials and children, they have a right to protective personal equipment. So what has happened is that National Treasury has approved a 13% that a 13% of the allocation for this conditional grant be utilized for that to make these centers COVID compliant. So what is happening now is that the provinces are adjusting their business plans in line with that, and we hope that the process is going to be finalized soon. Next slide, please. I have already dealt with this one, where we've developed draft guidelines for therapists in the Department of Basic Education on the coronavirus outbreak. And the purpose of the guidelines is to provide guidelines in terms of roles and responsibilities of therapists in all the public schools, that be it in the public, ordinary, special schools and special care centers. And that arises from the fact that we have realized that the absence of therapeutic and psychological and psychosocial support services, particularly during the extended lockdown, has an impact on both learners and teachers. And we think that therefore there is a need to make adjustments in this area, because there might be a huge demand as learners continue to return to school. Next slide, please. That one I have already covered, but let me touch on these issues. We find that the system is largely ready to take some of the learners. In other words, what I'm saying is that significant progress has been made in terms of making the system ready. But there are challenges that we have picked up, particularly in the area of water and sanitation, in the area of school hostels, in cases where where more and more learners return. Some school hostels may not be able to accommodate all the learners, but in our meetings there has been suggestions in terms of what should be taken. But in some areas already provinces have begun to deal with these issues. Another issue that where we've made progress, but with the application of the requirements for social distancing, it might raise some issues, is the area around scholar transport. We have seen that there may be challenges, and there may also be challenges in terms of how we utilize this, how we deal with the issue of those members of our staff who might be having underlying conditions and may not be able to return. The departments are currently auditing that kind of space to see how many teachers are affected, and the sections responsible have developed guidelines to that effect to assist in terms of what should be done. Next slide, please. Yeah, that one I've dealt with, the issue of the National School Nutrition Program. We've received reports that although there may be minor challenges, it's going quite well. And we are saying that we are aware that the existing staff to provide psychosocial support may not be, the capacity may not be sufficient as the demand increases. That one I've already dealt with. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, the next slide is my conclusion. My sense is that this time is like surfing. It's like we're in stormy waters. We can't smooth those the stormy waters, but what we can do is we can only learn to ride the waves, and it is in that form that we are going to be able to deal with these matters. That we are going to be able to reach whatever we've set for ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jabu. We can deal with questions now. I'm going to go to specifically for Yasira. For Jabu, I'm going to go to Yasira. Yasira, are there any specific questions for Jabu from your side?
Hi, Tinus. So the myriad of questions coming through has been, where do we access these guidelines? And are there any specific guidelines for severe behavioral problems? Thanks, Tinus. That's it.
Jabu, just make a note of that, and then I'm going to go to Basil. Basil, any questions from your side? Basil is still muted.
Nothing specific, except that it was about the guidelines, but people wanted to know, are these guidelines national, in other words, pertaining to all provinces, or are they specifically provincial? And I think we could answer that it is specifically, it is not provincial, it is for everybody. Then, of course, also the guidelines on therapists. So a lot of this is in the same realm, but we'll come to those a little later. Thank you, Tinus.
Yeah, let me just add, the document that was published yesterday, the 23rd, in terms of the return, the directions, speaks specifically to special schools, point number 8, learners with special educational needs. And there it mentions that guidelines for schools with autistic learners, and it just gives a link as education.gov.za. That makes it very difficult to trace, Jabu, where exactly it is. It speaks to there, and then there's another one. But if we can somehow get an exact link to where these guidelines will be found. Okay, over to you, Jabu.
Thank you very much. I think one of is the where are we going to access the guidelines. I've tried to access the document, so it's a bit tricky. I've raised the matter with communication, but if you get into our website, because that link puts you into our website. So and the documents, all the documents are under the links for schools. So when you get into our websites, you go to links for schools, then you'll find a range of documents there. So these documents are going to be in that under that link as well. So I think partly with regards to whether they are provincial or national, these are national guidelines. But what we've done is we've involved the sectors responsible for that. The sectors, the civil society organizations responsible for these specific areas. And in some cases, it also included school principals and officials. So we've tried to cover as much as possible the provincial dynamics to make sure that issues are covered. But we know that with guidelines, you can't cover everything. So other issues are going to be coming up and we're going to be dealing with them. That's why we have said these guidelines are a living document. So we can pull them and say, let's sort out this area. So that's a decision that we have taken. The question is, are there any guidelines for severe behavioral challenges? No, we don't have them. I think also what is happening is that I think that there has been a request that we do or we develop guidelines for all the disabilities. Let me say that maybe one of the things that I need to say is that you see with any difference, whether it be disability, be it anything, you will find that within a disability, for instance, there are diversities. In other words, there are different, a disability is actually a spectrum. In other words, you will find different levels of severity within a disability. So if we're going to try to cover all of them, then it will end up confusing the system. So what we've done is we've taken a conscious decision to say that these are the groups that might be affected too much, that might be affected severely by COVID-19. And we know, for instance, if you take the blind, the schools, the learners in the schools for the blind thrive through contact. In other words, they've got to find their way through contact. And we know that that social distancing for them and not touching for them is almost impractical. So that's why we took a decision to develop guidelines for them. If you take the guidelines for schools with autistic learners, we know that autistic learners are into routine. They want stability all the time. You can't make changes for them. We know that the change when there was lockdown already affected them. So what needs to happen is that we need to prepare, because otherwise they are not going to benefit at all from education when schools reopen. So we need to make sure that these routines are established so that schools are aware that this is what you do before they come. This is what you do when they come. And the deaf, you will know that you will understand that with the deaf, one of the challenges has been the fact that they need to know what's going on. And we know that in some cases, the messages are not communicated in a way that they are able to access. So that became a big issue because in order for anyone to protect themselves from COVID, they need to know what's going on. So it is on that basis that we said this category of children we must also develop guidelines for this category of children. I think then in terms of the therapist, I've dealt with it, yeah.
Okay, we need to move on. Basil, there was something you wanted to add. I just want to warn Jabu, I'm sure I saw a shark in the waters behind you. Just be careful. I'm sure I saw a shark. But Basil, over to you. You had a question.
Tinus, simply just to say to the folk that on the NAPTOSA website tomorrow, we will have the individual links for all the guidelines, and they will be published there tomorrow.
Okay. Thanks, Basil. We're now going to move over to Dr. Hester Costa. Hopefully, Dr. Costa, you ready? We're going to move on to your presentation. So it's over to Dr. Costa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tinus, for the opportunity to speak to you today. I think it's important for me to say that whilst you listen to the high-level presentation from Jabu, I'm trying to take it a bit down to the provinces, but then focusing specifically on the role that the therapists and psychologists and support services play. So if you understand it in that way, you will see where I'm coming from. So Rishal, if we can go to my presentation, please. So that is just a formal title to say I will be focusing on the psychological counseling and therapy support. We all know that in a special school, the difference comes in that we add to the provision that is public ordinary school has. As much as a public ordinary school has the curriculum, because of the high levels of support that children have, we come in and we add that whole notion of a support service for those children to access the curriculum. Thank you, Rishal. You could go to the next page. Rishal? Thank you. So just for entertainment, I decided to put a little bit of text there, and my challenge with you would be to find out what is the thread that I'm trying to take throughout this discussion. But just to start by saying, whatever we do in life, we need to understand the context in which we found ourselves, or in which we find ourselves. So if you listened to Jabu, you would have heard that the context is the fact that there are standard operating procedures or regulations and directives that came out. There's the whole issue of the requirements of the COVID and the challenges that have, the issues about comorbidities and so forth. So let us look further of the context you as psychologists and therapists have. You will see the first, go back, please. Go back, there you are. Let's look at the issues we need to consider in whatever we do and in whatever we decide. First of all, we need to understand what are we about. So if you look at the first picture, you would see the lady setting the table. You are that person. So you are the person manipulating the entire event for that evening, manipulating, considering a range of issues. You will see there's an arrow to the tablecloth, and that is your employer, the Department of Education. You will then see in the next picture, there's another arrow with the sun shining, and that is your obligations and ethical requirements that you have in terms of the HPCSA. In the next picture, you see the food that is provided. And at the end, that is the curriculum that we must make sure is accessible. And then lastly, and definitely not least, we must know our clients. So you must know the school where you work or the setting where you work. And you must be very clear professionally about the support needs those learners have. So in whatever you do, I want to assure you that all you need to do is just to understand the context you're in, and you have to consider the issues that is at hand, the facts that you know, the impact of every alternative that you're going to make, the impact of whether you're going to give therapy or not therapy, the impact of whether you're going to counsel or not counsel. Consider the alternatives, consult if needs be, and at the end, do make a decision. But then I want to say at the end, I want you to understand and affirm your capacity to just use your professional judgment. You are professionally qualified to understand your context, so just understand your professional judgment and trust your professional judgment. Rishal, we can move on to the next slide. So let us just look at a few things that I'm going to take you through that you need to consider whenever you do therapy. And one of the good things that happened with this COVID is it alerted us to things that I think do not necessarily need to disappear one day when this virus decides to go. So like Jabu said, we at all times need to comply with all COVID-19 protocols, occupation safe and healthy requirements, the directives and the guideline documents that we are eager to see. What you do as a therapist or a psychologist then is you need to go and sit down and say, then what does it mean for me? So the first thing you would do is you would review your current therapy load and prioritize learners. Remember I said you will know your client. You would go and review your timetables. You would go and see the spaces available, what is possible for you. You will go and look at activities and options of therapy methodologies. And you will go for those and expand your understanding and horizon of non-contact activities. If contact with a learner cannot be provided, again, like it was said, ensure that you have the appropriate PPEs. You must understand that even in the years to come, what we need to do is, as therapists, we need to include PPEs as a standard package in your resource requirement whenever you require your resources or you do your needs assessment for what you do require. And I think, especially in schools where there is high risk of coming through with contact, I'm just thinking of schools for children with physical disabilities, where there's children with CP drooling a lot, then you need to really sit and consult your colleagues and peers in Department of Health, check what they are using, check what is acceptable, and then also speak with your management and supervisors that it can become part of your standard package of PPE in your therapy center or in your school. Consider provisioning of alternative therapy approaches, and then again go to the indirect ones: home programs, teletherapy, parental brochures, and others. The reason is not only for you to not get contact, the reason is, the reality is that many of your children are not at school. So for you to reach your clients, you would need to go for those alternatives. As I said before, think about additional specialized PPEs and speak to your managers and your provinces that it might become part of your standard LTSM package. Let's go to the next slide, Rochelle. So looking at your therapy space or your room, the first thing that is very important is you must make sure you work where there's good ventilation. The reason is that you are doing a lot of direct contact and your spaces are usually not that big. As the standard operating procedure said, there must be regular disinfection, cleaning of doorknobs, things we don't think about, cleaning your telephone or your cell phone, cupboard handles and others. Make sure you disinfect or clean all surfaces in the morning before learners come, after every session, and at the end of the day. Make sure you have the appropriate sanitizers in your therapy room. Pack away or cover all equipment or material or tools that are not going to be used at that specific time. Not only for the risk it brings for the children and for yourself, but also to make sure that you don't need to overly clean and spend your time there. So if it's covered, then it means it's ready for use the next time. You have to go and look at your room or space again and allow for social distancing. And then you must keep bins with lids for disposing of PPEs. Sometimes PPEs can equally be dangerous if you don't dispose of them appropriately. And I hope, looking at the slide, you are starting to see the thread going through my presentation. So let's look at individual therapy and assessments. That's something that is really worrying to many therapists or psychologists. Again, your own safety and the safety of the learner is of paramount. So go and look at the appropriate PPE for every session, which means that you will not wear the same PPE for every child. You will really look at the risks the learner brings to you, and then you will prepare your PPEs accordingly. So what you need to do is prepare your workspace before fetching a learner or learners from the classroom. You must again clean and disinfect, as I said before. Once they get into your room, even if it's only for a few seconds, you need to remind the learners of the precautions of COVID-19. Assist learners who may have difficulty wearing masks throughout activities and allow for breathing breaks. It's very important for certain learners in our sector that they might start to show signs of distress when being in masks or wearing PPEs all the time. Please be on the lookout and allow them those breathing spaces where they can just rest from those. Accompany learners back to their classrooms. The issue of accompanying is purely just to manage movement and to make sure that social contact doesn't take place. Rochelle, we can go to the next slide. Psychologists specifically use a lot of play. So what are the practical guidelines that I can give you in terms of play therapy or play in therapy? Choose toys which can be washed and sanitized. So it means that you must avoid fluffy toys in therapy, as it will be difficult for you to sanitize after every session. Just a very practical a piece of advice. All therapeutic tools should be thoroughly sanitized, washed with soap and water before every and after every therapy session. If that is not possible, make sure you have wipes to at least wipe appropriately. Be wary of becoming too involved. You must adhere to social distancing at all times. And then obviously hand sanitizing to be done before and after every session and before touching therapy tools. So let's go to the next slide. So the other questions coming through was, what about group therapy and what about group counseling? So we said, for now, we really would discourage you to be as brave as to go for group therapy or group counseling. However, if you have the space and you can ensure social distancing and movement of children, you might consider having smaller groups. The choice of group activity should not include sharing and touching. Avoid the use of shared equipment like swings, hammocks, therapy balls, talking sticks or talking rocks. None of that can happen now. Prepare and wear appropriate PPEs for every session. So looking at the bottom, you're starting to pick up my thread. It doesn't matter in what shape or form, like Jabu said, whether the waves are rough, every time your professional judgment is there. As therapists also, you deal a lot with the management, maintenance, and care for assistive devices. So just a few thoughts on assistive devices. You must develop a guideline document that the learners in your school will understand, their parents will understand, that's contextualized to your school to say, how do you care for assistive devices prior to learners arriving at school? And one of the ideas are that therapists should conduct a needs analysis of the different learners who use assistive devices and types of devices from their own record and create guidelines for parents and learners. As I said, so that you, if a school for physically disabled again, you bring out for those learners using wheelchairs, how to disinfect or desanitize or sanitize a wheelchair. You must consider learners who receive assistive devices from your school as part of your outreach activities. Many of the special schools are resource centers and you have issued assistive devices. Go back to your records and make sure that you make contact with those learners who receive those assistive devices so that you can also share that information with them. So let's then look at learners who arrive at the school with assistive devices on a daily basis. You must have a designated area for sanitizing those assistive devices, a checklist for parents ready where they can indicate what has been cleaned, what has not been cleaned, where are the issues. And other users of the same device might also be aware sanitizing before and after. In many schools, learners share assistive devices, specifically if you think of your physio section where they have an assistive device they're getting used to. Make sure that you remember to also sanitize assistive devices when learners switch. If you want to go, there are Department of Health guidelines available for the use of assistive devices and the sanitizing of assistive devices. You can just Google it. There's also many international documents on this. So one of the questions that came through, as I said earlier, is what are the practical help that I can advise you on? What if a learner drools? So drooling is a reality in many schools. So we need to think of two things when we say what if a learner drools. For some children, drooling is just part of the package, and in whatever therapy you do, whether it's now physio, whether it's OT, any other therapy, drooling is going to be part of the package. And then there are those speech therapists that do therapy specifically to address drooling. So yes, just a few things that you can consider. If the drooling is the reason for the therapy, and the learner doesn't present any signs of illness. Remember I said, look at the facts. Initially I said, understand the context. The context is the drooling is the reason for the therapy. So what are the facts? The learner does not present with any sign of illness. Then you consider, take your professional judgment. Are you going to continue? If you have the necessary PPE. If the learner do present signs of illness, definitely you would put it on hold and report to the nurse or take it further. Again, your professional judgment. Then it says, go and look at options and go and look at the impact that your therapy or non-therapy will have. If I delay the therapy, will it be detrimental to the learner? Will it have long-lasting effects? If that is yes, obviously you must look at the possibility of continuing. If it's no, then you can delay it for a bit and maybe give an alternative, which is another thing. You can look at doing therapy but modeling it. If the learner can self-regulate and follow you, consider just being a model or use a model for the drooling therapy, or consider giving some exercises as a home program. Ethically, this learner needs to continue with therapy if ethically the learner needs to continue with therapy and according to your opinion, you know it should happen, but you are not sure whether it should continue, there are your peers and there are advisors. In many provinces, like in Gauteng, there's a provincial speech therapist or so forth. You need to contact them and just check what their thoughts are on that. And at the end, do make a decision and record it. And as long as you can understand and motivate in your professional judgment why you took a certain decision, I think you are very safe. So in general, if drooling is part of the package, you will go through the exact same process where you say, okay, let's look at the context, let's look at the facts. If I delay therapy, what is the impact? If it's a high impact, consider again. If it's low impact, maybe delay it for now. Look at alternatives that you can do to eliminate physical contact. Make sure that you have PPE at hand. Maybe have extra wipes at hand. Ethically, if you are sitting in a dilemma, consult. But at the end again, do make a decision. Going to the next slide, you will then see, just looking at the broader scope of support. We are all affiliated to the HPCSA, and we all know what is our scope of practice. But we must understand, like Jabu said in the introduction, that this is a different time. We all know that it's a state of emergency, in fact, and then there are different things that we must consider. So the HPCSA also on the 26th of March brought out a document where they addressed the whole issue of outbreak of the COVID in South Africa, and they gave some guidance. So just looking at the guidance, you will again pick up that the HPCSA said to you, you are professional, just use your professional judgment. They said that in the provision of a framework for ethical decision-making in a wide range of situations, including emergencies, these should be adhered to, your scope of practice should be adhered to as far as practical in the circumstances. But you might be required to go beyond your established procedures. Do this responsibly and with the required capacity building and training. If PPE is not available, take the following considerations. Can therapy be delayed? Can additional steps be taken to minimize transmission? Prioritize practitioners at high risk. Identify actions where you can do least harm and alert your employers. So what I would suggest, you would always need to make sure that you have enough PPE at hand, that you never come to a point where you would need to take that type of decision. Let us just then go to the next slide, and I'm also almost done. Rishal, if you can go. Although nurses, it's not therapeutic support and psychological support, I just thought of putting in one slide because medical care is also a very much a reality in our special schools. So just some ideas for the nurses to also consider, and you might be sharing it with them, is to also make sure that you comply with all the protocols when you administer medication. So I'm not going to read with it through it, but it's again, wash your hands, sanitize before use, sanitize after use, make sure that there's no access for people to touch whatever you are bringing. And maybe the one important thing is, at this stage, it might be necessary for additional support and hands to make sure that things are going orderly. And when nurses attending to learners in a school or clinic, again, it is the whole issue of the disposal of PPE, to make sure that you have extra PPE at hand, and also to make sure that you put your social distancing measures in place in your clinic. Let's go to the next slide. And it talks about advocacy. And that is such a valuable, oh, I'll get to the incontinence clinic now. Sorry, go back one. Go back one. A nurse is one of the most valuable assets you have in this time at the school. They are the people with the medical knowledge that can really assist you as a therapist, whether you're not sure if a learner is well or not well. But the nurse can also send messages on medical information or clips. They can train and orientate cleaning staff on the importance of disinfecting, not as an instruction, but for the staff to actually understand the why part of it. They can train staff on infection control basics. They can promote sanitizing and all of that. The last thing about a nurse, and that is again in certain schools, the management of the incontinence clinic. There it is extremely important that you must make sure that you have really detailed PPE. And that is where you need to engage your SMT to make sure that whatever is not provided for you provincially is augmented by the school. Frequent sanitizing again comes in. A whole range of PPEs, making sure that you have enough linen sheets at the school to really dispose, and to make sure that you arrange for appropriate medical waste disposal. So looking at the last slide now, you can see that whatever I said, I was just making sure that I remind you of certain things that you already know, because you are professional. And I want to say, just go forth and trust your professional judgment. So concluding to say, keep calm and use your professional judgment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Costa. We are going to go to questions now, but before we get to that, soon we are going to post 3 survey questions to you, which you have 30 seconds to complete. Just go with your cursor and just click on it. It's just 3 questions related to the ability to provide support during whatever it is. You can see what the 3 questions are. Please just, and that's the nice thing about these webinars, at the end we'll have immediately, we have the results of that. It is your ability to have provided curriculum support to learners, therapeutic support, and then the access to the nutrition program during lockdown. If you can just quickly complete that survey, and then while we do the questions as well. It's going to, I don't think it's up yet, but it will, you will be able to do that later on, or it will be up. Any questions, starting with you, Yasira? Any specific questions for Dr. Costa?
Hi, Tinus. No specific question for Dr. Costa. There was a question regarding severely mentally handicapped learners and how do we deal with them not understanding COVID-19 and social distancing. And our next presenter will manage that question, Tinus. Thank you.
Basil, from your side?
Nothing additional, thank you, Tinus, because the one question was about guidelines for toileting. And I think that if there is a guideline like that, we will post it. But if there isn't, we can pick it up at the end with the roundup questions. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Basil. If there's no more questions, then we're going to go on to our third speaker, and that is Michelle Ansel. Michelle, we're looking forward to your presentation. Over to you. And I will remember to mute myself.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome this time of the afternoon, and I'm hoping that being the third presenter, you're all still awake. You will see, after speaking Dr. Costa and everybody's well-organized slide presentations, my slides are extremely busy. You're going to look at them and you're going to think, how did she not manage to get the fonts the right size? How did she not manage to get the colors to match? And I'm doing it deliberately because I want you, as a very ADD person myself, I want you to have a look at what's happening in my presentation, to remind yourself to please not do this ever to your children in your class. So maybe after this you'll rethink that little lovely display of very bright flashcards you've got on against your wall. And we need to always think, and when we're presenting to our children, are we maybe not doing to the children what you don't enjoy having been done to yourself? So we can proceed with that. Thanks, Michelle. So, as you know, my name is Michelle, and I'm doing our massive new barrier to learning because I predict that in years to come, university students will be, when we mention barriers to learning, you know, there's a long list of the usual ones. This is probably going to become one of the new barriers to learning, and not just because of the physical mask. When I talk about masks, I'm talking about all the impact that the mask brings with it, psychological, discomfort, all of those things. So we're going to go through this today. I want to just say before I start that every slide here is actually a day's workshop. So we're going to go through 11 slides in less than half an hour. There's a lot I won't be able to touch on, but please take notes. And if there are things on each slide, a slide that might get your attention that you want to know about, please send us questions after that. And before I start, this is a very important slide. And it says, nothing in life is to be feared, it is to be understood. And it's the same as what Dr. Costa said. Knowledge is power. A lot of us are feeling overwhelmed. And it's because teachers, and I am a teacher, let me just say that before anything else. I am a teacher, but I believe absolutely in the multidisciplinary team approach. I have been very fortunate for 20 years to be able to work with therapists. So I believe that you work together, not against each other. And the only way we're going to get through COVID and come out on the other side is if we work together. Never be scared to ask. We'll talk about that later. But I think a lot of the things that we fear are what we don't understand them, so we fear. And where we work, we use alternative communication. So I'm going to show every time this to go to the next slide. So if we could go next, please. Let us look at this slide for 2 minutes. This is what I normally look like. This is my normal. Everybody keeps talking about the new normal, but I'm not happy with the new normal. And I think that we must not forget that it's not the normal forever. It's not normal. It will pass. This will pass. It might be, I'm optimistic. I'm hoping by the end of this year, I will be back to my normal. Other people are saying a year or two, but we must not forget what normal is in everything we do with our children. So for a minute, let's look at this slide. These are 3 autistic children. I have been blessed to have them in my life since they were 6 years old. They're now bigger than me. The absolute fallacy I deal at the moment, I work at a school with autistic learners, but I've worked with at a school for cerebral palsy learners with most disabilities. And all children are challenges. Let's refer to them as challenges and not disabilities, because these children are so able to do so much. And these children have taught me, number one, the fallacy that autistic children don't like physical contact. It's exactly the opposite. They either want it or they don't, and when they do, you have no space. So I am used to not having social distancing ever in my life. This photo, they bombed my photo. I looked like I was overdressed. The assistants were laughing at me. It was winter. My hair, as you can see, that's what it looked like, and there were hairdressers available then. My assistants decided they'd take a photo of me. My boys saw this, and they saw the camera. So this is not about their love for me, it's about their love for camera. I like to tell myself that they really do love me though. But this is where I am comfortable. So I had to sit in the COVID, and we were immediately, all of you, teachers out there, therapists, but our children don't do social distancing. But was it because we feared that, or because we feared our reaction to it? I am going to come back, our learners are coming back on the 6th of July, and I'm going to have to deal with myself and not allowing this. And how are we going to do that? And how are we going to deal with this, but then also move on to that this is not normal forever. Next slide, please. What do you expect when the schools open? Have you sat down? We need to deal as professionals, and when I talk about teachers, I always talk about professionals. We are professional people. We need to act professionally to be treated professionally. We need to treat our colleagues, our therapists, as professionals. Therapists, you need to treat the teachers as professionals, and that's the only way we can move forward. But have you actually sat down and thought, what can I expect when the schools reopen? Children are excited. We had one of our learners here today to come and buy a tracksuit. He's very excited. Autistic child, wearing his mask beautifully, very excited to be back at school. Anxious parents, rightly so, and please respect the parents' wishes at this stage. We phone, if a child has been absent for a day, we phone and check up because of the waiting list at our school and make sure that the children are coming to school, and this is not a time for that. We have to respect that our parents are anxious. Management, please, if you could just for 1 second stand still here. Teachers and therapists going back to your school, please be kind to your principals. Please be kind to your SMTs. You cannot imagine the overwhelming administration they've had to deal with from day 3 of lockdown. I went back in my diary to check, and from day 3, they have not had a break at all. They are overwhelmed. They get things in place. The staff are all asking, when are we coming back? When are we coming back? They tell them, and that has changed. It keeps changing. So your management is not going to be the happy, smiley faces that they normally are, so expect them to be overwhelmed. Staff are very uncertain because of these dates that have kept on changing, and very unrealistic expectations from everybody, from yourself. The most unrealistic expectations will come from yourself. Just be kind to yourself, be kind to staff, please be kind to everybody around you. Next, please. Behind the mask, so we're seeing masks and what masks and who are wearing masks and who can and who won't. Please just let's look at behind the mask. These are the children who are going to be sitting in front of you with their little masks on or off or on their heads or wherever. You'll get the well-adjusted child. There's very few of those. They are the children whose parents were not overwhelmed by this, who have tried to talk away from the children, who haven't had to watch ENCA news, who aren't terrified, who've been keeping up with online schooling. There are going to be very few of them. They will be there. Use them to be your assistants and to help you and to keep the whole morale of your classroom up. The child who doesn't take anything seriously, that child's daddy says, oh, this is nonsense, there's no such thing as COVID-19. The child will come up to you, and in the autism schools, it's wonderful because the children are so honest. I know we're expecting them. They'll come and say, oh, my dad says this is nonsense, I don't have to wear my mask. Expect that child. You may have a few behavioral problems there. The scared, anxious child is the child who's been subjected to the news all the time. Parents talking in front of the child. Around the brow with granny and granddad, they've just told them all their fears, and that child is petrified to come back to school. The aggressive child who's had to deal with a household throughout lockdown with parents who haven't had access to alcohol or cigarettes, parents who have lost their jobs, financial strain, that there are going to be quite a few of those, and they will of course take it out on you. And then the traumatized child, which is very sad, it's the children who have been in lockdown with aggressive parents, with abusive parents the whole time. So this is all sitting in front of you. How are you going to address that? And of course, then at the bottom, all the parents with their demands. In our district, we've had a parent who insists that the teacher screens a child about 8 times a day. So you've got very unrealistic, they want their children back at school, but they also they're not sure about what they're doing. Next one. So look quickly, barriers to learning. What are actual barriers to learning? There's 2 causes, and I'm talking as a teacher. Therapists, you know a lot more fancy terminology. I'm talking as a teacher, and teachers, please, these are things you need to know. As teachers, let's not say, oh, that's the therapist's job, or I didn't learn that. None of us learned this when we were at school, when we were at varsity. So let's please keep studying, making sure that we know what causes the barrier to learning, because at the end, I will talk about the CS process. Nobody likes a teacher who storms into the office and says, I can't work with this child. And then your SBST will say to you, what must we do with the child? I don't know, but I can't work with him. If you go with a well-informed document and proof that this and this and this is happening to this child, and no one expects it to be like a medical doctor, but please at least refer to the right terminology. There's internal factors, which are things we can't really do anything about. It's the genetic factors, brain damage or dysfunction, temperament. We all know if you've got two children, or personality, two children, how many times do you hear, I can't believe you brothers and sisters? They come out of the same home, same upbringing, but it's just that inborn personality. And here we must be very careful through all of this to not change our children's personalities. Their physical characteristics and general health, which we must be very careful, make sure that your children fill in the comorbidity questionnaires before they come back to school. And please, could I ask, I know a lot of schools are doing it the day the child comes back to school, they're given the health questionnaire. Especially special schools, our numbers are not that large. Make sure that the parents get that questionnaire at least a week before the child comes back, so that you can guide some of the parents through those questionnaires if need be, and that you have those questionnaires before the child comes. External factors, these are the factors that are going to be causing the barriers to learning. These are the masks on the children. Their family, what they've had to put up with during lockdown, their peers and their friends. Too much online activity has been going on and the parents have not been monitoring it. What have they been hearing from their friends and their peers? Does the child feel pressurized to come back to school because everybody is, we need to go back to school, we can't go back to school? The environment that the child lives in. Many of our children have absolutely been starving over lockdown. That is a fact. And they've been back into access foods. The nutrition scheme has been closed. So these children are actually just starving sitting in your class. And then we're going to want to be wondering why he's not wearing his mask. There are more important things to look at before we actually even start looking at that. The school, what is the environment of the school? How are the teachers, as scared as some of our teachers may be, how are those children being greeted? How is the whole demeanor of the school the day that they come back? Can we please pretend, even if you are not overjoyed to have 15 children in your class again, we need to put up a front for the children. As Dr. Costa said, they are our clients, they are our most important people. The natural disasters that cause anxiety and trauma, and that was the COVID-19, that is a natural disaster that we can't do anything about, but how are we going to address it? And the actual physical mask, right? Now the next one. So when I talk about please knowing therapeutic information, if you are a special needs teacher, you have got to have some general idea of it. It's never too late. Let's use COVID-19 as the time to reboot our whole career. Let us start accessing documentation. Too much documentation is shared and it's not even read by teachers. Have you read standard operating procedures? Have you actually, comorbidities was a good example. Have you read up on the comorbidities for children? Do you even know your own comorbidities? Should you actually be at that school? Let's use this now as always know there was a document, know where to access it. Know about things like sensory processing, and this is very important for masks. Our biggest problem with masks is it's another sensory issue that we are introducing into the child's life. So we have 7 senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, position in space, touch and movement. The therapist will use words like vestibular and proprioception. Learn these words, learn what it's about. I still refer to therapists, but at least I know, and I can write this in documentation when I want to motivate, and this is important, for a child to not be at school, because not all of your children can actually come back to school. We envisaged our schools with the normal classroom size, with the normal, that is not going to be normal. I will talk about that again later. Do you know that there are 7 senses? Do you know that now this child has got all these 7 senses that need to work together, and there we've put a mask on him as well? The brain has to process everything, and how the brain processes everything influences how the child learns, how the child plans. There's a word praxis. Go and see if you can Google praxis. What is praxis? How the child socializes. And now, on top of all of this, if one of these 7 senses are out by anything, I have, with movement and position in space, I have huge issues. And lately, after lockdown, we all had to diet. Walked in to check as my daughter was talking to me and I smelt the fed cook, and I actually can't. I said to her, won't you just say what you said again? And she said, but mommy, I was talking right. I was talking to you. And that is, the children in your class are sitting there. The minute one of these things is off, they lose you. That mask is actually something now on their face that is going to affect all of these senses. Next slide, please. Right, so this very busy slide tells you the sensory challenges. Our children are going to come back to school with two huge challenges. One is sensory and one is communication. Sensory, that mask is going to cause the red headings, intense physical discomforts. We can't say that we haven't experienced it ourselves. We've experimented, we've had time to experiment until we found the mask that we can actually tolerate for the whole day. Anxiety, sensory claustrophobia, and distractibility. And under it, I've put some of the categories that can actually be influenced more than what they normally are. So your child with ADHD is going to be experiencing even more now. Not only does he have to sit on his chair, he has to sit on his chair with a mask on his face. Anxiety, not only am I already anxious, now I've got the mask on. Claustrophobia is a very real fear that only people who have actually experienced it will understand. And of course, distractibility, which we all have a measure of. At the bottom of all, then you'll say, it says, any sensory integration problems. Please, as a teacher, if you are one, go and study up a little bit on sensory integration. Speak to therapists about it. If your school does not have a therapist, and this is the most important thing to take away from this slide, if your school does not have therapists, you need to access therapists. You need to go to your COVID committee, to your SBST. You have to say, where can we please find money, any money? Sell fit cook outside your school. Contact a speech therapist. Get in contact with Dr. Costa, with me, or with somebody, therapy friends. There are a lot of therapists that will now, because therapists have also realized that their role has to change. They will come to the school, and not for the children, but for you. Get a speech therapist. In this case, get an occupational therapist here to come and address these issues, just sensory issues, in teacher terms, in layman terms, to help you. You are the therapist in your class for the next. You should always be the therapist in your class as well, with the help of a therapist. Go and please negotiate. We have got our money from the education departments. I am almost sure we'd have to negotiate that as LTSM. It's support material to the staff. It is support material. But please get therapists on board to help you with the sensory challenges. The next slide, please. Next slide. We're going to talk on the next slide about communication challenges. My slides aren't moving on. Okay, next slide. Right, let's stay on the sensory challenges then for a while until Rochelle, as soon as he moves it on, I'll start talking about communication. But I have realized here with ADD, what I didn't mention to you was be very, very careful of your children who have ADD, which is just the attention deficit without the hyperactivity. Those are the children that you're going to see of that sweet little girl. She's so good. It's a little girls that sit in the back of your class, and they just sit there. They're very sweet. Now, she's not going to communicate with you at all because she's hidden behind a mask. Communication challenges. A lot of queries about the masks for the deaf and for our autistic learners who absolutely, they need to see our faces. It means a lot, body language, all forms of communication. There are a lot of people providing these masks. Ask around, you can contact me. I have a few that we've worked with. They must be able to see your smile, and I would actually love it if all teachers could wear these, or visors. Please decide, is it really necessary if you do have a class where you're standing in front of the class, you're 2 meters away from the nearest child. Do you need that mask and visor? Get yourself a good visor. Get a visor that they use in hospitals, let the visor that's a longer visor, do something. Put a screen in front of you, but take your mask off for times during your class so that the children can see you, or wear a mask of this because those children need to see your smile. Please let the children see you smiling. The communication challenges are huge. The shy child is going to be, he's just going to disappear. The child with physical challenges, and I'm glad that Dr. Costa spoke here about the children who have physical challenges, that actually the drooling and so on, but the physical challenges, please the child who battles to speak anyway, and that in our cerebral palsy schools, the children who you stand and you listen to them and they talk to you, but it takes a while. Now it's another thing that you're putting in front of them to stop them from communicating. Please make extensive use. Now is the time to be using all the communication cards as much as of alternative communication as you possibly can. The visual learner, we're going to have more than usual. Our children are distractible, but now just think about how much screen time they've had. So much screen time. You're going to have to put a clown hat on. You are going to have to wear a funny mask every day. You are going to have to get through to those children because they're visual. They can't see your mouth moving in any case. So you are even more of a blob to them than what you used to be. You need to, if you have to dress up as a cartoon character, please do that to communicate. And communication isn't one way. It's not just the child, it's you and the child. How are you communicating with that child and how is he communicating back? And in fact, all our children are going to have communication challenges at the moment. Please address it as best you possibly can by being as creative as you can. Next slide, please. What can I as a teacher do? This is the most important, and I haven't been watching my time, but I will go through this as fast as I possibly can. This is where I said knowledge is power and you are a professional person. You would not go to a doctor who hasn't studied anything up, who got his qualification in 1990, which is when I got mine, and has never bothered since then to update knowledge. You cannot get away with saying that's how we did it in 1990 anymore. Remedial teachers that used to put away all of their lovely resources and they bring it to us now because they've retired and they're 80 and it's in their garage. We can't do anything with that because it's so outdated. So please make sure that you are up to date with everything. And as special schools teachers, please don't only concentrate on the special schools. Know what's going on in the mainstream as well because it affects directly what we do. There is the warrior with a mask on. You are armed with knowledge, or at least knowledge on where do I get my hands on this. Build yourself a network of knowledgeable people around you. I have, through NAPTOSA and other ways, have a huge network of people. Tinus de Pre will know. I have sent him messages before that he ignores. Sometimes they just ignore me, but because they know that I must go and look for that somewhere else. Or I've asked that question 10 times before. Don't be scared of asking questions over and over until you get the answer. Be able to say to somebody, you know, I don't know right now, but I'm going to find that answer for you. And don't be scared to say to people you don't know, but make sure that you find the answer. You are that doctor with the apple in her hand. You are as professional as a doctor, but you've got to make sure that you actually know what you're talking about. Special school educators, you need to demand that you are treated like a professional. But we are not babysitters. We are not here just to look after children. We are here to teach them with a lot more passion than what is needed in a mainstream school. But you can only be treated as a professional. The way I looked on that first photo is how I often looked when I had the privilege of having my own class. And I still demanded, even if my hair was full of green paint and standing on, and I had children hanging all over me, that if someone came in, they addressed me as a professional. And the only way you can do that is through knowledge. So know where to access laws and documentation. Know your COVID committee at your school. Don't be scared to go to them. Do not be aggressive, but go to them with knowledge, and sometimes you'll need to help them. Help them to see the difference between the disciplinary issues and the learning barriers, and explain to them why there must be differentiation when it comes to masks. Please, none of this in our school code of conduct and policy. We will all wear a branded mask that looks like this. You've got to stop that immediately. Even school clothes, we do not have to wear school clothes every day. We need to wear clean clothes every day. So if that means that mommy's only got one tracksuit and we have to have civvies until level 0 every second day, then so be it. You are the champion for the children in your school. Please fight for them. The classroom is your domain. You need to look after your classroom. We're getting far too many queries about who must clean my classroom. The only way you can be in control is that you know who's been in your class, where they've sat, has it been cleaned. And then see us, I'll talk about at the end. Next slide, please. Next slide. That little photo at the top, please, this is something that I would like a whole webinar, if we could, on this, just to address what you can do in your classroom. But all I can say is please be creative. Be creative in your classroom. Make sure that the child has, let's go through it, no unnecessary apparatus in your classroom, because it's another thing that has to be sanitized. And as a teacher, I would make sure that I sanitized everything before I left the classroom myself, because I know who sat where. I would wipe down my door handle, and I would leave my classroom. So remove unnecessary things that have to be cleaned. If you have the privilege of a cleaner, then please make sure that you don't make their life more difficult. Water bottles on the desks must be allowed, and children must be allowed to drink water during lessons, because the masks definitely, we all know that, make you thirsty. Create a corner where masks can be removed. If you don't have the space in your class, put it outside your door. On that desk, have an activity that can be wiped down. So look at things that are laminated, sensory bottles, that and give all the children a class. But when you see that child over there is battling, I can see he's battling, because you need to watch your children like hawks. Say to him, please won't you go and name the table, go and do our activity. And you do it please for 10 minutes, and that must be a mask-free zone. At that, have a little picture of a person without a mask. You take off your mask there. When the child leaves, you calmly walk over with your spray bottle, spray and wipe everything down, wear gloves if you want to, and then come and let the child go back. But it's actually make sure that you don't stigmatize these children, so let the ones who are the well-adjusted child also go, because he'll want to also go and do the fun activity there. Please, we are not chasing a curriculum here. We are having our children back at school to get them back into their routines, to look after our children. Our schools are safe places, and to keep them safe. Recommunicate your communication style. If you have a teacher's voice by nature, it's going to be worse when we get back to the normal. We are all going to be shouting at each other. Give them a place outside at break where they can sit, have a look at the two bottom pictures, make a hopscotch where they can still play, watch each other doing it. Encourage social activity, even though we have masks, because that is going to be the biggest casualty. There's going to be no more socialization. Our children already battle with communication because of cell phones and tablets and things. Now we're telling them, keep away from each other. Let them eat in class, so that when they're outside at break, even if they are sitting, put them further away from each other and let them actually talk to each other. Let them draw pictures on the cement with chalk. You are at this one for a minute, write a letter to your friend, move on, and each one has their own chalk and they can carry on. Be creative. Pinterest has many of these ideas, but as a teacher, we can't keep asking for documentation, ladies and gentlemen. We have to be creative, follow the guidelines, but within our own selves, be creative. And please prepare the child for normal schooling. When we get back, make them write letters to each other every day. We must make sure that we do not desocialize our children completely. And please remember that they are children. If you have apparatus at your school, let them play one at a time, spray it down between. If you have an assistant, the assistant wipe it down in between. Let them go and have time without their mask on. We can create that within our spaces. This is something...
Michelle, 2-3 minutes,
yes.
Please.
Right, okay, so let's talk about this at a later stage. Next. We're nearly done. Next slide, please. CS, I won't go into it, but please study this slide. If you don't know what CS is, please make sure that you, at least as a teacher, know what an SNA1 is. Go to your SBST and say, we need to do CS training. You need to, they are the children who you don't want coming to school, or the children who come to school, and let's talk about, he won't wear his mask. You have to try to help him to wear it. But if it's not happening, don't run to everybody and say, this child might go home. Fill in the SNA1 and refer it to your SBST, who will refer it to the DBST. You'll get things done much faster than that. Please go and study CS. You all have documentation on it. I just think a lot of us haven't looked at it. And make sure that your SBST is implementing CS properly in your school. If they're not, offer to be part of the SBST, and you empower yourself and empower them as well. This is another workshop on its own, but please go and do self-study on the CS process. The SNA1 is the responsibility of the class teacher. Do not use generic comments in it, and make sure that you're talking about that child. Next slide, please. I'm going to read this. It's about autism, but please put in there where it says autism, the child wearing a mask, and every child in your class. Imagine you were in a foreign, noisy, and crowded city at night. not understanding the language spoken, recognizing only a few words but not really comprehending situations taking place around you, wanting to express a need for help but not being able. This experience may begin to help you relate to what a child with autism feels like on an ordinary day, and that is all of our children. And please, I think as well as the poor children in mainstream, there's lots of our special needs children sitting in mainstream classes. Let us make sure that we address and we put ourselves, this is really a time to put yourselves into the children's shoes. Last slide, please. With the children at our school, this is a quote by a father of an autistic child. He said, I would not change the world for you, but I would not change you for the world, but I would change the world for you. Now is the time. Your world is your classroom and your school at this time, and you need to change that world for that child. Please know and respect the child in front of you. I hope to be speaking to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. We will then go on to questions. Yasira, any specific questions to Michelle?
Thanks, Tinus. One question came in asking, where do you get the forms that the parents need to complete for the learners before they return to school? That's one question. Another question that came in was, how do we address learners who are deaf and have multiple disabilities? So they have ASD as well, they're hyperactive, etc., and so on. How do we address those? And I think Michelle can just go with those two first before we continue, Tinus. Thanks.
Yasira, do you want to say something? Are the misplaced children in schools about the CS process, or will you deal with that later on?
We can deal with that later on, Tinus. Thanks.
Michelle, just those two questions, then I'll go back to Basil.
It concerns me highly that the questionnaire, the question for the learner questionnaire, the comorbidity questionnaire, was shared. The problem, and I must come up for all teachers and everybody here, so glad Mr. Manuel is listening because we've spoken about this a lot. Too much documentation has been coming through. So your principal has just missed it somewhere along the line. Tinus and I will put it, Tinus will share that, the learner questionnaire. I have one right in front of me here, sorry. I'm grabbing it off my desk. It looks like this. Okay, COVID-19 learner questionnaire. We'll share that with you at the end of the session.
But I'm sure it's on our website. Basil, it is on our website, am I correct?
Yes, but I want to agree with Michelle. Too many documents, of too many versions of documents. And of course, you know, we've had these perpetual leaks of documents where even before a document is finalized, it finds itself in the public domain. And when the real one does come out, people are still stuck on the one that came out first. So we are going to publish the documents. I'll chat with Michelle and Tinus and our other presenters, and let's see which ones we need to have on site. Insofar as questions that were asked before we started the webinar, there were questions that related to administrative issues that our panelists couldn't answer. Things like staffing, etc., etc. Now those we will answer to, but those answers will be circularized to everybody who had logged on. You will get that set of answers because they are things that we would need to answer very specifically. And I know even on the on the webinar now, not everybody may have that query. So allow us to do that within the next few days. Insofar as additional questions for the panel is concerned, no, I don't have any that I have picked up. Sorry, there was the issue of the documentation, and I did have one, which I have now lost. Oh, there was one that was asked about using your own initiative, and yet there are guidelines being given. Is this not setting somebody up for some issue later on? There was a question in that regard. I'm sure that the response will be, we're not saying ignore the guidelines, but we are saying use what you know is best, because in every particular setting, You are the master of your universe there, and you know what is best in that particular setting. Michelle, I think that was directed to you.
Can I just say there, I just want to say what concerns me the most is we shouldn't actually you shouldn't be sitting with a COVID positive child in front of you that we know is that you actually, everyone's so concerned about how do if a child's positive, we've had a lot of this, and I have to treat him. You need to, this is where your COVID-19 team comes in. That child should not have been let past the school gates. So your screening, it starts at screening, and that's why become involved in the whole process. Make sure that, yes, we've got brigades now, but who of your management is also at the gate because they know the children coming in. Do you have the right contact numbers for those parents? And yes, follow guidelines, but you need to know what the guidelines are. Once you're quite secure in the guidelines, I check and check and check and nag and nag and nag, and then use. And you know, that's why you've got a school-based support team. You need to support each other. But within your classroom, if you're social distancing, the children have their masks on, your class is being cleaned properly afterwards. We can't, within there, you can be very creative.
Thank you, Michelle. Before I give to Basil, and then after that I will conclude. Anything from our presenters? I'm going to start with Jabu. If you can unmute yourself, Jabu. Any concluding remarks from your side?
Chair, I'll just say that thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'm thinking, as I've indicated, we are going to be learning some of the things along the way. And I think the issue of professional judgment has become a major issue, in that you will have to use more of that, because as I've indicated, the guidelines for every situation in your context. There will be those instances where you have to balance the things and say, but it is not safe this way. Maybe let me contact so and so to find out what I can do with this situation. So your professional judgment will be quite important in support of any guidelines that we would have developed. And I think the question of when the guidelines are going to be there, I am confident that they will be in our website before the end of this week. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you, Jabu. Just in terms of what Jabu just said, we were on a medical webinar on Monday, and Professor Mahdi said what he said a month ago in terms of the whole COVID, the medical side is not applicable. That's how things are changing daily in terms of, well, and we need to be accepted to that things are going to change over the next few months, and we can't be rigid in our application of things. And I believe, I always say to the staff, until the highest authority, which is the Minister of Education, stops you, you do what you, in your professional opinion, feels is the right thing to do within the boundaries of what is acceptable. Dr. Costa, over to you. Any concluding remarks from your side?
Thank you, Tinus. I think the only thing I would like to do is I want to ask school management teams to assist teachers and therapists to work through these documents. So maybe it would require of the school management teams and the COVID committees to summarize and alert people, even every morning in assembly, to say, let us just highlight 5 guidelines in terms of sanitizing. So, and do that with all staff, not only teachers in the staff room, but every staff member in the school. And then again, just to echo what Basil said, just trust your professional judgment. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, from your side?
The only thing I didn't touch on was the home teaching. I would suggest that all schools survey their parents now, before the parents are coming back, and find out, because we're stressing about, I'm going to have 15 in my class. If you actually ask the parents if they're sending their children back to school. So send out WhatsApp, we found works the best. Find out how many parents actually are and give them the option to change their mind. Tell them clearly you can change your mind at any time. But at the moment, parents are extremely anxious. Survey your parents, but then if the parents say that they're not coming back, the school has to offer homeschooling. And in our cases, we're not talking about online, we're talking about getting them proper worksheets and resources. Worksheets are the wrong word. Paint brushes, the stuff to actually do the work with. A couple of schools have sent out resource packs at the moment. We have LTSM budgets. We need to use it for that now. That is the stationery. Does the child have pencils at home? And then the teachers need to actually follow up. It's hard work for the teachers, but in mainstream, they're doing it for huge classes. So you're teaching the class in front of you, and that work must go home to the learners by however way. And now that we're allowed to do it, your drivers can even go and deliver work to the children at home who can't access it at school. We can't just say you can sit at home now for the rest of the year. What is your follow-up plan in for the children who are going to be at home? They need to be kept up with what we're doing, or at least have some, for them it's normality, some keep up with their routine.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, what is also, if you can, if it's possible, is to create, we've done it with grade ones, a drive-through, where you prepare the package for the children, and the parents drive through and you give it to them. They don't have to come into the school. They stay in the car and you give it to them wherever it's possible, but also dropping it off using school transport to drop it off at points where you normally would have picked up a child to do it that way. Basil, in terms of, and just on the survey, but over to you before I conclude the webinar.
Thank you. Just the last few words. And of course, Richard is going to put up the survey in a second, so please don't log off before you've seen the outcome of the survey. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, guidelines are exactly what the word means. It's a guide, because your context may differ. But the guides are to guide the general pattern. Sometimes they just don't work for you. So use them, but of course, alter them as well to make them work for you. That's a very important one. Secondly, we know that children with comorbidities, the highest incidence of children with comorbidities would be found in our special schools. And that is why Michelle's specific reference to needing to support these children. We actually don't know how well it's going to work. We actually know that some schools will make it work very well. And then also, of course, we know that some are going to fail. But we've got to try and make it work as best we can. And I've been on record as saying many times, I am not interested in saving the academic year. We are only interested in saving learning. And this is what we need to be doing to ensure that all our children are gaining something out of the year. And finally, from my side, a big thank you to everybody, the panelists, Tinus, Yasira, and of course, our background people. There's Rishal in the background, there's Leanne in the background, and they are making this work for us. Thank you very much. Over to you, Tinus.
Yasira, sorry, you've got the last word before I conclude.
Saving the best for last. Thank you, Tinus. There was numerous questions that did come through that wasn't pertinent to the webinar specifically. We have endeavored to answer these questions as a national Portcom, so we will do that and send out the responses via circular. So if your question was not asked, don't feel that we ignored it. We will address it just in a different forum. Thank you so much, Tinus.
Thank you, Yasira. Then from my side, thank you to our presenters and as Basil said, the people behind the scenes, to Jabu and to Esther and to Michelle. You know, it was so easy to organize this because I phoned them and they were immediately prepared and ready to come on board. So to the three presenters, thank you very much. We do appreciate your spending your time with us this afternoon. And then to everybody else, all the people on the webinar, thank you very much for this afternoon. And we will, don't log off before you've seen the result of the survey. And then this will be made available later on. Everybody, we've got your email addresses. It will be sent, it's a YouTube, and you can, as I said, you can actually check it. If you've got a smart TV, you can actually check it on or watch it on your smart TV. But it will be, the YouTube will be made available. And please use that to the Portcom members and to schools. Make it available to your staff members to watch as well. Thank you very much. Let's have a look at the survey before we conclude. And keep well and keep safe.